What if the way you understand something is actually limiting what it truly is? What if the labels you use to define truth are too small for the reality behind them? And what if one simple question could completely reshape how you see identity, authority, and purpose? In Mark 12, verse 35 to 37, Jesus asks a question, not to confuse, but to reveal. Up until this point, he has been answering others. Religious leaders, teachers of the law, skeptics, all bringing their questions, trying to test him, challenge him, understand him. But now Jesus turns the direction. He becomes the one asking. And the question is this: how is it that the teachers of the law say that the Messiah is the son of David? At first, this seems straightforward. The Messiah, the promised one, was widely believed to come from the line of David. This expectation was deeply rooted in tradition, prophecy, and understanding. The teachers of the law were not wrong. They had knowledge, they had structure, they had a framework that made sense. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He adds another layer. David himself, speaking by the Holy Spirit, declared, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." Then comes the key point. David himself calls him Lord. How then can he be his son? And just like that, the question shifts everything. Because now, it's no longer just about lineage, it's about identity. The Messiah is called the Son of David, meaning he comes from David's line. But David himself calls this Messiah Lord. And in that culture, a father or ancestor does not call his descendant Lord. That would reverse the expected order. So what is Jesus doing here? He is not denying that the Messiah comes from David. He is expanding the understanding. He is showing that the Messiah is not only a descendant, but something greater, someone beyond the limitations of human expectation. This moment is subtle but powerful, because it challenges a common tendency to reduce something profound into something manageable. The teachers of the law had a category for the Messiah, a role, a title, a defined expectation. But Jesus reveals that their definition, while not entirely wrong, is incomplete. And this is where the deeper message begins, because it is possible to have correct information and still miss the full truth, to understand part of something, but not the whole. And when we hold too tightly to partial understanding, we can resist anything that expands it. The Messiah as Son of David fits a certain expectation. It suggests a human leader, a political figure, someone who restores a kingdom in a visible, structured way. But Jesus introduces a different dimension, one where the Messiah is not just part of history, but stands above it, not just connected to David, but acknowledged by David as Lord. This shifts the perspective from horizontal to vertical, from lineage to authority, from expectation to revelation. And this is where the tension lies, because people often prefer what they can understand, what they can categorize, what fits within their existing framework. But truth does not always stay within those boundaries. Sometimes it stretches them, expands them, challenges them, and that can feel uncomfortable because it requires letting go of certainty, of control, of familiar definitions. The crowd listening to Jesus responds differently than the leaders. Mark tells us that the large crowd listened to him with delight. Why? Because while the leaders were focused on protecting their understanding, the crowd was open to discovering more. They were not defending a system, they were receiving insight. And this difference matters, because openness creates space for growth, while defensiveness creates resistance. Jesus is not trying to complicate things. He is revealing depth, showing that identity cannot always be reduced to a single label. And this applies beyond this moment, because we often define things and people based on what we already know. We create categories, expectations, limitations, and once something is placed within a category, it becomes harder to see it beyond that. But reality is often larger than our definitions, and growth requires recognizing that. The Messiah is not only what they expected, he is more. And this more is what changes everything. Because if the Messiah is both the Son of David and the Lord of David, then his authority is not just inherited, it is inherent, not just historical, but eternal. And this expands the understanding of who he is, not just a figure within a story, but the center of it. And this is where the question becomes personal. Because it is not just about how people understood the Messiah then, it is about how we understand truth now. What assumptions do we hold? What definitions do we rely on? What frameworks shape how we see? And are we willing to allow those frameworks to expand? Because sometimes the barrier to deeper understanding is not lack of information, but attachment to existing interpretation. We hold on to what we know, even when something greater is being revealed. And this is what Jesus addresses, not by rejecting what is known, but by building on it. By showing that truth is not limited, it is layered, and each layer adds depth, clarity, perspective. The question, whose son is the Messiah, seems simple, but it opens the door to something much larger. It moves from genealogy to identity, from expectation to revelation, from surface to depth. And that is the power of the question. Because the right question does not just seek an answer. It reshapes understanding. It invites reflection. It challenges assumptions. And it creates space for transformation. Jesus does not force an answer. He leaves the question open. Because sometimes the process of thinking, of wrestling with an idea, is where understanding begins. The crowd delights in this because they sense something deeper, something that goes beyond the usual debates, something that invites them to see differently. And this is what makes this moment unique. It is not about confrontation, it is about revelation, a quiet shift, a subtle expansion, a deeper awareness. And this is often how truth works. Not always loud, not always obvious, but steady, clear, transformative. So as we reflect on this passage, we are invited to consider, how do we define what we believe? Are we holding on to labels or seeking deeper understanding? Are we comfortable with partial truth or open to greater clarity? Because truth is not static, it invites growth, expansion, movement. And when we allow that process, we begin to see more clearly, not just what something is, but what it truly means. The Messiah is not limited to one definition, and neither is truth. It is deeper, richer, more expansive than we often realize. And discovering that requires openness, humility, and a willingness to ask and receive the right questions. Thank you for watching this video. If this message spoke to you, take a moment to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who may need a new perspective on identity, truth, and what it means to see beyond the surface.